All the worst people in the world are heavily engaged in the propaganda war in support of the mass killing, the genocidal onslaught launched by the Israel Defense Force as called. Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Robert F. Kennedy, and many other heavyweight, big platform, big audience personalities, 300 in Hollywood alone, have thrown their bodies into the firing line. They have declared their everlasting love for Israel. They have declared their redefinition of the word genocide. They have redefined the term self-defense. They are sending money, some of them even sending themselves as mercenaries. People are being redeployed from the front line in the Ukraine. Weapons are being redirected, and above all, perhaps, financial aid is now swinging wildly away from the funding of the Ukraine war to the funding of the Middle East war, on the cusp of which we now stand. Israel says it has not yet invaded the Gaza Strip because of bad weather. That always sounded fairly implausible to me, but it remains the case that whilst a Palestinian child is now dying every 5 minutes under bombardment from brave pilots in the sky who dive bomb the squalid refugee camps, mosques, hospitals are being told to evacuate within an hour before that hospital is bombed. Just think about that. White phosphorus raining down. None of that has been affected by the weather, but the massed force of an invasion fighting force of Israel's finest, the most noble army in the world, they used to call themselves. I don't hear that quite so often nowadays, is still parked outside the gate. Here's the real reason why. Hezbollah and Iran have made it perfectly plain, along with lesser players like the Shiite militia forces in Iraq, like the fighting forces inside the Yemen, Ansar Allah, have all made it plain that if this does not stop soon, and if there is a ground invasion at any point, that they will become involved in the war. I think you need to get some perspective on this. Hezbollah is approximately 100 times more powerful than the resistance movements in the Gaza Strip. 100 times more. They have 100 times more missiles, and their missiles are not homemade. Their missiles are targeted, and they're targeted on the centers of power and the centers of population of the state of Israel itself. The Israeli people will not just have to hurry for the bomb shelters. If Hezbollah enters the war, they will not be able to leave those air raid shelters because the missiles will rain down incessantly. Israel will, of course, fight back, and the United States aircraft carriers, who present something of a sitting target, I must tell them, for the Lebanese batteries on shore. Mark my words about that. The United States will join the war. Britain, in a kind of carry on up the Khyber caper, has decided to send 2 of its sadly depleted Royal Navy to the shores of the Levant. To do what? I'm not sure. But we can assume that whilst they themselves will become targets, that they will not remain silent. Their guns will not remain silent. The problem with that is, once America and Britain begin attacking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, Iran will attack them and will attack Israel itself. Now, if Hezbollah is 100 times more powerful than Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the alphabet soup of Palestinian resistance organizations, then Iran is 1,000 times more powerful than Hezbollah. And thus, a general state of Middle East war will then exist. You'll have Iran, Ansar Allah in Yemen, the liberation forces in Iraq, the state of Syria and its armed forces will recover the stolen Syrian territory of the Golan Heights. Hezbollah will be all guns blazing. Israel will be fighting in Gaza and in the north of the country against Hezbollah, drawing its allies, presumably America and Britain, to the fore into deeper and deeper into that conflict. And here is the overarching problem. Syria and Iran are close allies of Russia and, not far behind, close allies of China. So if Israel, America begins attacking Iran, Russia and China stand behind Iran. I hope you're beginning to get a clearer picture. That's why the ground invasion has not begun, because Israel and its allies are calibrating just how difficult a job it will be to fight amongst the rubble in the alleyways, every inch of which are known by the defenders but not known at all by the attackers. All the while, no internet or not, there will be television pictures of Israel's invasion of Gaza emerging. They'll emerge, apart from anything else, from the many, many Israeli soldiers that don't want to do this and are arguing, and they show themselves on video arguing with their officers that this is not the right or at least the wise thing to do. So the fighting amongst the rubble, in the alleyways, underground, hand to hand, will be very, very costly indeed. Just bilaterally between the Palestinians and the Israelis, once the others join in, as they are openly pledging to do, then we are on a helter-skelter to hell. A helter-skelter to hell that will not exclude you and me. It will not exclude us. This conflict, if it spirals in the way I have described, will, first of all, stop all oil production in the Persian Gulf. It will stop the transportation of all oil on the water and in storage of the oil in the Persian Gulf. People are bleating about the price of oil now rising over $100 a barrel. You will not be able to buy it for $10,000 a barrel. There'll be no oil. That means your industry will stop. That means you will become unemployed. That means your already chronic and debilitating economic situation will plummet further into the abyss. And then there's the security risk to our own people of this grotesque over-identification of Western countries with Israel, of their absolute double standards, of their total hypocrisy. You think that the Muslims in France, in Britain, in Germany, and so on, haven't noticed that the Ukrainians are heroes for defending their land against an invader, but the Palestinians are terrorists for defending their land against an invader? Do you think that the people who already live here amongst us and in North America have missed the fact that whilst Palestine can be cleansed repeatedly in ethnic cleansing, in siege and sanctions and repeated bombardment on a massive scale, 2008, 2012, 2014, 2018, Gaza's already been reduced to rubble time after time. Do you think that people have not noticed that we don't give a damn about the thousands of Palestinians who are bleeding this minute in hospitals with no light and no power? Do you think they don't know that their co-religionists have no water and no food? Do you think they don't know that we are deliberately starving people, just like those who besieged the Warsaw Ghetto until the people there revolted? In the words of Frantz Fanon, we revolt because we cannot breathe. The Palestinian people cannot breathe, have not been able to breathe for more than 7 decades. And everyone can see it clearly now. They can see that every government in the Western world is fully behind the slander of the Palestinians and fully behind the slaughter being carried out by Israel. The Western leaders are echoed by their so-called oppositions. And both the governments and the opposition have a media which blares incessantly the very same propaganda, and now has a repressive regime of legislation to close down those with an alternative point of view. A perfect example of whom is Jackson Hinkle, who will be up in a minute. Jackson Hinkle's one of the brightest and best broadcasters in the whole world. But you'll have to go looking for him because he's now been deplatformed on almost all, thankfully not all yet, but almost all of the social media platforms. This show could be cut off in mid-sentence at any time by the regime of censorship and repression that I am talking about. But even all of that will not stop the truth coming out, because the genie is out of the bottle. That's why we had demonstrations all over the Western world of hundreds of thousands of people on Saturday, and probably another one next Saturday. And they're breaking out everywhere. Every main city in Britain this weekend had a demonstration in support of the Palestinian people under this murderous rampage being conducted by Israel with full Western support. Meanwhile, the countries that said no on the Ukraine situation, countries like China, countries like South Africa, countries like Brazil, are saying no, we will not go along with this. And we demand a ceasefire. How radical a demand that has turned out to be. We demand a ceasefire. We demand negotiations. We demand a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, as was agreed 30 years ago on the White House lawn in the Oslo agreements. The European Union is falling apart. Mrs. von der Leyen immediately set off for Israel and promised the earth to Mr. Netanyahu, as she had already promised the earth to Mr. Zelensky in the Ukraine. She has grossly exceeded her brief. Her zeal has upset countries like Ireland, countries like Norway, and others in the European Union. And little Borrell, remember him? The man who, the chief gardener, who described the rest of the world as a jungle. His nose is out of joint because that's his job, to go around the world threatening war, pestilence, famine, and disease on other people. Who is this von der Leyen, this German daughter of the Third Reich, to steal his thunder? Well, I told you Jackson Hinkle's coming up. He is right after this short break. You don't want to miss it.